Did your mom make all your clothes, or did they buy them?
Oh, they made them. Yes, she made them. When I was going to school as a kid, we had sack aprons. They were called sack aprons. They were dressed just plain and tied. We tie them in the back, and then they had one pocket here, but buttoned down the back. But we call them sack aprons. And she'd have to wash it out at night, just like they did with Jim's overalls, wash them out at night and iron them the next morning to go to school again. We didn't have changes. We did finally have, so that we had a best pair of shoes and everyday shoes. And you better not be caught with your best shoes when you were supposed to have your everyday shoes on. Your Sunday shoes, we call them. They were our Sunday shoes.
Now, I recall vaguely that mother being busy nursing and so on, there was a woman came in and did some sewing for her.
Oh, that was Aunt Lila Hale.
Yes, there you are.
She made, she done a lot of sewing for Mother when Mother was gone. In fact, my junior prom dress was green, and it was pretty, and it had pleats down the front. But she'd come here. She was a real seamstress. She'd go to people's houses. Did you know her, Alice, at all? She'd go to people's homes, and she was a very devout Mormon, and she preached from the minute she come into your house until she closed her eyes at night after she went home. And she'd just give you the dickens if you didn't do what you were supposed to do. You know. I'll have to tell you one funny story about her. You remember the year you all came up from Bryce for Christmas in Park City, to mine and Joe's place? That was the year the kids got their bicycles.
Oh, yes, okay.
Well, she was down to Mrs. Jordan's. She was a relative of Mrs. Jordan's. And we went down and brought her up. She wanted to meet all the kids that was there, you know. She didn't know them. And I told you about Chick having a bottle of moonshine whiskey, and it blew up in the cupboard. Well, they had some wine. Now, there was never any wine or booze in our house, in mine and Joe's house, but somebody brought it in. But anyway, darn Chick gave Aunt Lila Hale a glass of wine. And she never had a taste of it in her life. Is it time to go?
No, go ahead.
And it crocked her. She was tighter than a drum.
Yeah.
Just so I didn't swear words. I have to have that light in my face all the time. Did I the other day? I didn't remember.
You sat back over that direction, away from the camper a
No,
little bit. Yeah,
No, she sat right there.
No, I sat
I
right
thought
there.
she was over there, kind of.
No,
Dale was sitting there.
Dale was here.
Oh, that's right.
Denise
Okay.
was there.
The names of your mother's parents.
The names of my mother's parents. I've got Grandpa Thompson's name was Frederick Christian Thompson. And Grandma's name was Abigail Dicey Tanner Thompson.
Do you remember where they were born?
Grandpa Thompson was born in Copenhagen, Denmark. And Grandma Thompson was born out here in Farmington, Utah.
What did they do, their occupations?
Oh, good God.
Do you even know?
They were farmers in their later life. They were, well, I'd have called them farmers in Granger, wouldn't you? He farmed in Granger, and he owned a saloon in Park City. That was on Main Street.
Do you remember the name?
It was called the CCC Saloon. I was going to get that picture from Joanne, and I forgot, because she's got the old picture of him standing out in front of it.
Did you remember, now is that the Grandma Tanner? I mean, is that no, did you
No,
remember
that's
her?
my own grandmother, this is we're
Yeah.
talking about.
Do you remember them?
My grandma and Grandpa Thompson?
Uh-huh.
Oh, heavens, yes. I remember them a good many years. I remember them both till they died. Grandma died at age 80. Grandpa Thompson died at age 76.
Okay, your earliest and fondest memories of them.
Oh, I could go on with a lot. They used to come to visit. They left, I think I told before, they left Park City by wagon and went to Idaho. Did I have that on a tape? You know, too.
Mm-hmm.
And they used to come to Park City to visit us. And we was always awful excited when they were coming.
Did they have to come by wagon? Or did they have...
At first they did. Then they took the train. They finally took the train. But they left by wagon when they moved to Idaho. But they came down later by train. And they stayed for maybe a week with us. And it was always great fun because grandfather would tell us stories. And I said that we had a chair like my chairs here, called captain chair. We had a chair like that. And I'd sit in that and he'd make out like he was going to sit on me. And he only weighed about 250 pounds. Of course, he didn't squash down on me, but he always made. And then he used to sing to us in Danish and taught us to, I remember telling you this on one of those tapes, that they taught us to count up to 10 in Danish. I was always happy to have them come. Look forward to it. It was always a great pleasure. Kids, we go tell the school kids our grandparents is here at my whole visiting.
What did they die of? Do you know?
Grandmother Thompson just died suddenly with a heart attack. Grandpa Thompson had a stroke. He was an invalid for about 6 years. Grandma took care of him. He died in Idaho, on their ranch in Idaho.
Okay, your Grandpa Thompson did... What stories are told in your family about the crossing?
They didn't
Nothing?
come across.
Oh, I thought you said he was born in Denmark.
Yes, he did. We don't know when he came. We've never found out yet. Joanna searched and searched and searched, so we don't know when he came. He was only 9 years old when he went to sea. He was a sailor. But when he came to Utah, we've never been able to find out.
Oh, did he spend long being a sailor?
I don't know. That I couldn't tell you.
I didn't hear that question. What?
How long
was
he a sailor?
Till he was a young man. How old was he when he married Grandma? She was really young, but he must have been in his 20s.
He was 14, and she was 14, and he was 6 or 7 years older, I think. It'll be in the Tanner book, but to remember the dates, I can't do it.
No.
They're gone.
It's too bad the stories of his life in the seas are gone.
Don't know. I've never heard anybody say when he came that I can remember. And of course, I know why he came unless he came to join the church. That I don't know for sure. And Joanne hasn't been able to find that out either. Now I know that he brought 2 sisters here after he came. One was Aunt Lydia, And then he brought a cousin whose name was Camus Fargo. He brought those over here, and they all lived in Park City many years ago. They're all dead and gone years ago.
Okay, I know you've told it before, but again, give the names of your father's parents.
Well, my father's name was David Henry Gwilliam.
No. Henry Bain.
Henry Bain and Gwilliam. I'm glad he corrected me because I knew better. And my mother's name was Mary Ann Williams. William.
Now, do you remember them?
I remember Grandpa Thompson, or Grandpa Williams. I don't remember her, no. No, she was my grandmother. That's right, on my father's side. No, I don't remember her.
Do you remember any stories about them? Or?
No, I remember when they lived in Ogden, and I can remember when Grandpa died, and Mother and Dad going to the funeral. They went to the funeral in Ogden. He was buried in Hooper. That's where he's buried. That's Grandpa Gwilliam I'm talking about now, so that's right. Joanne and I we wanted to know which wife was buried by him. He had 5 wives. Now don't ask me to name them all, because if I had the sheet in front of me, I couldn't.
Well, we're mostly concerned with the one that...
Yeah. But anyway, we searched, Joanne and Bill and I went up to Hooper one time to see if we could find, she was trying to locate Grandma Williams' birth date and everything. And we searched that cemetery over, and finally it was just getting dusk, and we decided to leave, and Joanne and Bill and I, we kind of separated, we were searching the whole place. And Joanne cried, "Oh, I found it, I found it, I found it." And when we got up there, it was the wrong grandmother.
Oh.
But Joanne and I did find her. She's buried in Ogden. We know where she was buried and when, but she's got those dates. Dates.
Yeah, well,
slightly,
dates are...
don't mean
No,
a thing
I want
to
the
me.
stories more than the dates.
But we know the grave now.
Now, I could supplement some of Mary's story about grandfather William. In the Nephi Jensen's Nephi, who was the church historian, not Jensen, but anyway, in the booklet, in the book that was published about Utah pioneers, his biography is written in there, along with some of his accomplishments. He was sent to the San Bernardino mission with C.C. Rich, Apostle C.C. Rich, which of course we know was called back in the so-called move to the south during the Utah War. And then they went into Cache Valley. He went to Cache Valley and settled not in, well, a little while in Cache Valley itself, but finally moved south into what is known then and still later as Paradise.
That's where Dad was
And at
born.
this point, this is where our father was born. He chose to be born in Paradise instead of waiting to die to go there. Then Grandpa Gwilliam was asked to go out into Hooper to work in the salt flats to manufacture. There were sun-drying salt there, and this was an assignment of his. And at that point, he became, at one time a bishop, I think at one time a stake president. But the family record of this information is very, very limited, and what I know about it is having read the historical books relative to it.
So it's in the
Yes,
FDP.
it's recorded. But during the persecutions over polygamy, when the Cullum Tucker Act was finally found legal, he was in a great deal of difficulty. As Mary said, he had 5 wives and had to separate himself from them, as was the custom, except at that point he did serve a time in the state penitentiary, the territorial penitentiary, because of polygamy. And when he was released, it was under a proviso that he not cohabitate again, and went back out into the Hooper area, where he kind of isolated himself from all things, including activity in the church, as I understand it. This from other members of the family, that he withdrew. Our son Jim was doing some microfilming work in the Weber County Courthouse. He had a job there for several months, microfilming old records. And he called me one day to come down and look at a warrant for arrest and a jail term assignment for Grandpa Gwilliam, and Jimmy was real upset about this thing, and I tried to convince him to pull us a copy of it so that we could have it for a family record, but he seemed to be reluctant, that he didn't want to talk about a grandfather that was in jail. But I did read the warrant and the court record on it, and he was jailed at that time, not for polygamy, but for non-payment of bills for debtors, and served some period of time in the Weber County Jail. But you have to consider the fact that he'd spent nearly a year in the penitentiary, in the territorial penitentiary, and while he was there, he had 5 families who were eating and buying coal and trying to subsist as best they could. And when he came home, he was inert. He couldn't get himself situated, and as far as I can tell, never did very well from that point on. But anyway, he
They went in the lumber business, you know.
well, yes, but it was
He and his family.
mostly his boys that went into the business, and then.
But I gotta make a correction. He only had 3 wives. It was great-grandpa Tanner that had 5 wives.
Yes, okay,
I
that's
made
correct.
that correction. He just had 3. Let's don't give him any more.
Now, do you know how Grandma Gwilliam managed? Did they just have to manage on their own, I guess, or you don't know?
You mean my grandmother?
Yes, yeah.
They lived on that farm. They farmed in Ogden, or in Hoopers, as far as I know. Now, what year she died? See, it's the Tanner side that I remember so well. You see, it was the Gwilliam. And Joanne, if she's got any more on that, she hasn't told me, but she's trying awful hard to get it. But
Now, so you never met your Grandma Gwilliam?
no. I didn't know. I don't remember what year she died. He died in 1906, I think, didn't he?
Yes.
He died in 1906.
So you'd have been...
And I
Any
remember-
information I have is just a family tradition that I've heard talked about. One of my intimate stories is, of course, of my father's funeral, wherein the boys, his half-brothers from another family, all assembled, and they were a great group of men. They just were raucous and friendly, and all sorts of fellowship. I have to keep from cluttering my own thoughts, because I was only 9 years old, and here this house was forming with these fellows and their wives, and no one was permitted to be sad at Dad's funeral. They just wouldn't permit Carrie, as they called her mother, they wouldn't permit her to cry. Just she never had a chance, and so they would tell stories about their family. And this was the only personal contact I had with any of those, except in later years when I met one of them in Baker, Oregon, and then he came to visit us in Park City. But the name of Gwilliam in Ogden was. They were stalwarts in the business field there, and then slowly or gradually, by singles and by groups, moved into Idaho and further up into the Northwest, and we just have never had much contact with them.
This has, okay, what is your father's full name?
David Henry.
David Henry. Okay.
Don't put an S on the Gwilliam.
Right. Okay, personality characteristics. You told a little bit about him before.
Like he
but-
grumbled at everybody, and everybody thought he was an old grouch, and he wasn't at all. He put his foot in his mouth just like Aunt Mary does many times, and had to take it back out again. But he was a gentleman, really. Jim only remembers him as a sick man. And, of course, I remember him.
What was he like when he wasn't ill?
Well,
Or-
we always had plenty to eat. He worked in the mines, and he worked in the stores, and he always worked. But he wasn't an old crab. He really wasn't. I'll stick up for him till the day I die. I know how he used to grumble at Florence would bring her girlfriends and home, and they'd have rouge all over their face, and he'd call them out, tell them to go take it off. Well, that was none of his business, you know. And I've heard myself do the same thing. Go get your hair cut or something like that. I had a lot of my dad's qualities, lots of them. But he was good to all of us as far as he never whipped any of us, never. But when he spoke to us and told us to do something, he went and done it. You didn't wait to be booted, or you didn't wait to be slapped. You just went and done what you were told to do. But we weren't afraid of him. I never was afraid of him in my life. I can remember one incident when I was in high school. We'd go home in gangs, you know, throwing snowballs at each other, and couples, you know, and we got up to the Lecomp's corner there where we went up, we come up Second Park Avenue, that would be, wouldn't it? And these guys, and we was, you know, in couples, and we were just having fun after school. And here he comes up the street, and he had his hat tipped back, and we'd had his hand tipped back, and just like Tom, he'd had a drink. So maybe more than one. He wasn't drunk, he wasn't staggering or anything. And he didn't say a word, only time you were home. And boy, those kids were all scared to death. And believe me, I didn't hurry home. I never was afraid of him. But he spoke quick. Tom did the same thing. Tom would growl, and gosh, everybody thought he was an old crab, and he wasn't. He'd give you the shirt over his back and do anything under the sun for you. Now, I'm right about that.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Perfectly right.
I tell you a story about the grandfather, Dad.
Your dad now.
Yes, our dad, yes. To illustrate his approach to some things, our sister Florence was living in a house out in Cottonwood, just about 2 blocks north of where our little house was, but a schoolhouse. And she was working every day. She was working for a coffee house, Cook's Coffee Shop, a coffee packing manufacturing term in Salt Lake. And so she hired a girl to take care of the children. And the girl was just a young, mature, but she went and had her hair marceled, was the term. It was just really fluffed up and curled and piled on top of her head. And prior to that, she'd had long, wavy hair down her back. And as Dad walked into the house, she braced herself and touched her hair. "Oh, Mr. Gwilliam, how do you like my hair?" "Just like a load of hay," he said, and walked right on.
Just got it on. Never stopped. I'm sure it sounds just like him. He used to love to brush our hair. He brushed Mother's hair. Mother had long hair. I had long hair. Frances, she said her dad used to, that was even after I left home. He brushed her hair. He loved to sit, and we'd sit on a little stool or something down in front of him, and he'd brush her hair. And brush it for hours. He just, really enjoyed the long hair. Mother never did have her hair cut until after Dad died. I don't know what he'd have done if she'd have cut her hair before he died.
Wait a second, I just accidentally, okay, you've got him tipped back. Now I don't want her picture yet. I'm going to try to get, okay, try closer. Okay, try back just a hair. Okay, good. Oh, it's recording. Okay, this is a picture of him when they got married.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
what did he look like? Was he tall or short?
Gosh,
Later
I've got a
when,
picture
and
of
especially
him.
later.
I've got a picture of him with his, the stiff, the hard
He
collar.
was shorter than I.
Yes, he wasn't.
He wasn't very tall?
No.
Okay, Bob.
Mother
he was
was,
about like Tom, wasn't he?
yes, he would be about 5'5", 5'5" something like that, and Mother was probably 5'3" or 4", 3 at the most, I guess.
She wasn't too tall.
And all of us, as we came along, were taller and bigger than he. I doubt that he ever weighed more than 140 pounds in his life.
I never
Oh, so he was
Very
really,
thin
He was very
and wiry. Always wore a mustache, as far as I can remember. In fact, early pictures of him, he had it, kept it trimmed.
He went out to Nevada one time to work in the gold mine. The mines were down or something, and he went out there. I don't recall just how long he was gone, but he had a beard, his mustache was grown, and his hair was long when he came home. Now that's a long time ago too, and the year, I couldn't tell you, but I know he was always glad, we were all glad when he got home. We used to miss him too when we had these kids' diseases. He had to leave, he had to stay out.
oh, so he could go to work and not
So
be
he worked,
quarantined.
and he'd come and...
Do you know where he went, or
Where did he stay?
where did he
Oh,
stay?
Lord, I know, probably with Grandma Thompson or somebody, I don't know, because this is way back when, I wouldn't know that, I can't, that's...
I can supplement the story about the going to Nevada, the gold mines. He went actually to Goldfield, which was one of the fabulous gold strikes. Tonopah was silver, and 10 miles south of Tonopah they struck this gold in Goldfield, and everybody was going to...
Did he go as a miner or
Oh, yes.
for himself?
Oh yes, he was a miner, that was his business. He went out to wrestle work, actually, to work in the mines. And about this time, the bottom dropped out of everything in one of the early depressions. This would have been about 1905 or 6, I imagine, Mary. But in the process of going to Tonopah and to Goldfield, he brought back, or had made, or brought back pictures of the town and pictures of Tonopah. And when I went to Nevada to work in the mines, those pictures were so vivid to me, having seen them in the family, that when I crested over the hill and drove down into Tonopah, it was just like I had lived there. I could identify nearly every building and every mine shaft. And by the same token, when I went down to Tonopah, or to Goldfield, the same thing occurred. The remnants, by the time I got there was strictly a ghost town, probably not more than 25, 30 people living there, but the buildings were mostly there, including a fabulous hotel. So this confirms that. Then there's one more mining story that I can supplement from Mary, because this was after we lived out here. For some reason or another, they discovered there was a job in Idaho, a mining job in Idaho. So he and Russ and Dave may have met them up there, but I'm not sure about that. But they went to work in a mountain, small mine of some sort, and I guess nearly starved to death. They worked considerably, but they just got no money for what they were doing. And among other things, they had to live in a cabin infested by rats. And when they first gave up and came home, Dad, the rat had chewed the crown of his hair right out of the middle of his head, and it nibbled off the toenails off one of Russ's feet. So they had a souvenir to come home with, not only of poverty, but of some hazard working in the mines. These, of course, it was towards the end of his life when this happened.
Yeah, that was after they came down here. See, I didn't live down here at all. When they moved down here, I didn't come. I stayed in Park City. I had to keep the telephone off the stove.
So did you live with a friend, or?
No, we had our home. Francis, Florence, and Russ and I lived in the home until they left, and then I just had a room. What was her name? Dad wrote me a letter at that time. I wish I still had that letter. He would have liked for me to come home, because Mother was out nursing. She'd gone, I'll tell you when it was. It was when she went to Park City to take care of, I won't mention names, but the Thompson girl, you know, that had the baby, the mother went up to take. That's when that was. And my thought's gone. See, and every once in a while it goes, so all we can do is giggle till it comes back again. What was I telling you about?
The letter.
The letter.
Oh, the letter that he wrote. He would like for me to come home, you know, because Mother was gone. But she was only up there about 2 weeks. And of course I was working, you know, made the big sum of $9 a week. Imagine living on that, hand board room. Aunt Mel pretty well fed me though, because she had the bakery that she stopped by, especially breakfast.
Do you remember hearing how your father and mother met?
That I don't know. I sure don't. Do you, Jim? Do you ever heard? I have no idea.
Most important thing he taught you?
Oh my God. Tie your shoes when you get up in the morning, believe me. Get fully dressed and tie your shoelaces and have your hair brushed before you ever come out of the bedroom. And boy, that stuck with him. Jim, I may not remember that, but boy, we sure did. when Mother would go out nursing in Park City, we'd all, you know, she didn't have these appointments with Head, you know, gosh, sometimes she was taking 2 or 3 of them close together, so she'd be gone. And when she went to their home, she stayed and took care of the family and did the cooking and took care of the mother, because the mother stayed in bed 2 weeks then, you know, and the baby. Well, she'd sometimes go in the night and we wouldn't know it. We kids wouldn't hear it. And pretty soon we'd hear pots and pans a-banging and a few swear words, believe me. And we'd all, our heads would all come up at just once and say, uh-oh, Mother's left, Dad's getting breakfast. Every pan in the house was being pounded somehow or another. He was banging, making the fire, and Mother always made the fire. Dad never made the fire, but see, he did. He got up and made the fire. Now, we was in the coffee house when this happened. So you was around then, so we wanted all the raisin. Dad's gone. Then Francis tells the story, I don't remember this one, about the cooking rice and had it all over the kitchen. He didn't know how to measure it, you know, so he had rice and everything in the house.
Okay, now your mother, her full name.
Persis Carey Thompson Gwilliam.
And her personality characteristics. She told us
Yes, I
last
told
time
you that.
some.
I know I've told you. She did. She had a wonderful disposition. Always willing to help.
Oh yeah, it was good picture too. Okay, what did she look like? You know, we've got this picture of her. What did she look like later?
We haven't got a late picture of Mother.
Well, I've got the family
Hold it
group
back.
when
Oh, yeah,
we
we
were
got
in
the
the big
family
house.
picture of her.
The big house with
A little
Francis and myself with Mother and Dad.
I've got that. Is it all right for me to move a minute?
Yeah. Okay, now who all are in the picture?
There's
Now,
Grandmother Thompson,
Which is over here on...
and Mother was the oldest.
okay. Okay, come show
Show
me.
us which one's which, Aunt Ray.
Okay, I've got the it focused on
See,
her.
here's Grandmother Thompson. And this is Florence, my oldest sister. And this is Mother. And this is Bill Buck. That's the 4 generations. Bill was the first grandchild.
So this is your mother, and then you said she lost weight.
Yeah,
From that
she looked kind of poorly.
Do you know what Jimmy's telephone number is?
His house, I've got it written down here.
I've got it. Am I on there?
Yeah.
That picture you took the other day of me,
Mhm.
that big one in the middle,
Mhm.
that bottom one, that was my 75th birthday. It wasn't my 80th. Not that that make a lot of difference, but it was. That was my 75th.
Okay, so your mother, what color were her eyes, do you remember?
She had brown eyes and blonde hair. So she was very nice looking.
Jim home, please. Well, this is Grandpa. Do you have any idea where he might be?
Okay, this is your mother when she was 16.
Yeah, when she was 16. Of course, I wouldn't have known her then. But as she was older, she was well proportioned. She was heavy, but she was well proportioned. And she wore her clothes very, very well. She always looked nice in her clothes. Even her house, what did they call them? Wrappers. Do you remember that, Alice? Wrappers? They were something like a moo-moo now. They had a yoke. They used to wear those in the early days. Covered
For
them
my
all.
time.
Yeah, that was before your time. That's going back farther than you can. But she always looked nice. And she always wore front aprons. Do you remember that, Jim? She always wore front aprons.
Mother?
And that she made.
But so every day she wore an apron?
Yeah, always wore a tie apron. You know, a cover on her. Just tied around her waist and tied in the back around. That's what she used to do.
So if her temperament must have been quite mild.
Oh, yes. She'd give you a swat if you needed one.
What was her child rearing philosophy?
Oh, God, don't ask me. I wouldn't know, I'm sure.
Well,
They were a big family. Gosh, there was a whole bunch of them. Of course, a lot of them died as children, too, but they...
Oh, what way did she raise children? What was her
Apparently
philosophy? Not your
not.
mother.
Her philosophy.
Yeah, how did she try to raise you guys?
You describe that, Jim. We had to behave ourselves. I know that.
Firm hand, but a very loving hand. And I don't think Mother had very much education, but she was wise. she would have been a great psychologist, for she would say repeatedly, people will do just about what you expect them to do. I've heard her say it many times. And she expected the children to behave, to be ladies and gentlemen, to be loving and kind to each other. And I think that was where we were at. She expected self-reliance, and we pretty well did just that. And as far as I was concerned, I got a great lesson from her in her willingness to be of service to other people. She would leave whatever she wanted to do, whatever she had to do, to go do some good for other people. I wouldn't have known how much compensation she may have gotten for it, but I do know she had a great deal of satisfaction in doing something good for someone else. And I'll confirm Mary's part that she used a firm hand. If there was something needed to change of direction, you got it changed pretty understandably.
Okay, you may have already touched on this, but the most important thing that she taught you.
Did you hear it?
Yes, I don't know how to separate that at this point. I was less than 14 years old when she died, and yet I'm sure she shaped my attitude on life, that I was to be self-reliant, kind, willing to help other people. Mother was very devout religiously, but I never felt any stern hand on her part to see that I conformed in any way. It was just expected of me, and while she was an influence, I did about what she expected. I just got a philosophy from her that's lasted me all my life. All that I've done in dealing with my children, I'm sure, was influenced by what she was able to teach me in the few years I knew her.
We all did that. From the very beginning, she just taught us right from wrong. We knew it and knew how to handle it. If we had to have a swat, we taught us swat. And we knew that we shouldn't do that again. I think I mentioned several little times she clouded me one time. And I was really too old to be clouded, but I got she really took, she always looked out for the other person. She was always doing something for somebody to inspire.
Okay.
I've recalled many times and have written it in my own story about Dad's razor strap, which was the guiding force in my life as a young fellow. Anytime I stepped out of the line, my mother used Dad's razor strap as a corrective measure. I'm sure the pop of two straps of leather popping together was a lot more vicious than striking me. And I created the demise of the razor strap and also the razor. Incidentally, after Dad had died, I decided I needed to learn how to strop the razor. And so I imitated him and hung it up and then proceeded to draw the blade back and forth, and he would just flip it this way. Well, the idea is you turn it away as you're stroking, see. Well, my first stroke, I stroked with the blade into the strap and cut the thing right in two. So after that, any correction I needed had to be done with a willow or a stick of some sort.
Did you feel too bad about it?
The razor strap?
Yeah.
Not at all. Except that Russell had inherited the razor strap and also the razor, and I thought there might be some repercussions from him, but I don't think he was too enthusiastic about it. He preferred the Gillette that he owned by that time. that on more than one occasion when I had failed to get home as I'd promised or had not done something I said that I would do, Mother would send me to the woodpile or the willow patch and get a switch for her use, and it was necessary for me to bring the weapon home for her. Weapon's not too good a word, but that's about what it was. And after the boys built the new home for her up on far down lane where Pauline Tom raised his family, there was a big patch of willows between our house and the Faust home, incidentally, where James Faust was born and lived as neighbors to us. And so I was home late, came home late, or some such thing. So Mother sent me to the willow patch. And I very carefully whittled off a good-sized willow in good length. And as I slowly wandered back, I even peeled the bark and made a nice handle and reached down and got a little sand to take the slick off it. And Mother was sitting on the new cement steps waiting for me to bring it back with the anticipation that she would smack me around the ankles or the knees a couple of times, and therefore I'd learn my new lesson. I handed it to her and she got hold of it, and I kept pulling it away from her a little bit, and she finally gave it a big pull and her hand slipped off it. So I put the right end in my hand and then turned her over my knee. He was big enough now. And then I proceeded to sit and thump her on the seat of the pants with that thing, and she laughed till I thought she would die. She just giggled and giggled.
Mother laughed all over, too.
Just like a bowl of jelly. And that was the last we ever had of having to get a willow for my benefaction.
There was one incident about Dad. I don't know whether I ever mentioned it before. For some reason or other, Dad always had a tick at Russell. And he was the only one, but Russell just couldn't do anything just right to suit him. And that was the result of that was that Russell used to spend an awful lot of time living with Grandpa and Grandma Thompson in Idaho. And that was the reason. Because Dad just had a pick at him all the time. Nobody ever knew. I asked Mother about it many times, and she didn't understand why either, but he had a picket for Russ. And Russ was always a good-natured, good-enough guy too, but that's how come he lived, and he did. He lived an awful lot. He lived a lot of years. Not maybe the whole year, but a lot of time with Grandpa and Grandma Thompson.
Well, he was up there when Mother took me up there in the fall of 1918.
Alice, would you please hand me a Kleenex?
If there's no more about your mother and father, then your brothers and sisters in order.
In order.
Because I'm not sure about.
Okay. You want every one of them, even the ones that died?
Okay. And let us know which ones died. And then we'll get stories about them, a little bit about them.
Well, first was Dave. And then Frederick. He died as a baby. I mean, he didn't live a month, I don't think. Then Florence. And then Gilbert. And then me. And I think it was, then Russell. And then the little girl that died from the whooping cough. She was just a baby too. And then Tom. Oh, Tom was ahead of Russ.
No,
Yes.
don't believe so. This is all recorded in that Tanner history
Hand
book.
me that
We could just
Tanner
pick it
book
up
right
there
there on
quickly.
right there on the desk. Wasn't, yeah, I guess Russ was older, That's what's going on, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
I guess so. You're right. See, I know just where to turn. See all the dirty pages? David Henry, Frederick Christian, Florence Abigail, Gilbert Franklin, I'd missed Gilbert completely, Gilbert Franklin, and then Meade, I was the fifth, and then Russell, and then the seventh was Persis Carey Gwilliam, she's the one that died, and 8 was Tom, and 9 was Pernice Francis, and 10 was James Llewellyn. No, you don't need the dates of those. They're all right in front of you.
Yeah, they can get that from
Yeah.
there.
Now you want some detail on each of
Okay,
them?
yeah. What brothers and sisters were you really close to?
Yeah, I was always close to all of them. I'll tell you, I don't think I've mentioned this about Dave selling the park record, have I?
No.
When Dave was just a kid, you know, they used to the park record came out on Saturdays, and he had regular customers. And he was, let's see, Dave was 7, 8 years older than I, and he'd go get his records and take them to his customers. They sold for 5 cents a piece, and you'd have to buy them, you know, the paper got so much of that too. But anyway, there was a lady across the street named Mrs. Tridle that we were real friendly with. She was an English lady. She was what we call Cousin Jack, and she used to make Cousin Jack pasties. And every Saturday we could bank on her giving Russell a great big Dave a pasty when he brought her record to her. And then that was the end of his line, and he'd bring it home, and it was big enough for us all to eat on it. Do you know what a pasty is?
I assume it's a little pastry.
It's just like it's a meat pie, like.
Oh,
And they're
okay.
made individually, and Chick James used to make them all the time. Florence made them. I've made them lots of times, but many years ago. But they have just meat and potatoes. And no, you don't put vegetables in the real ones. No, just meat and the potatoes and onion, and then you cut that up. You know, just put the meat in raw, and then you roll it in this. It was a special crust the English used. We just used pie crust. But she always gave Dave her pasty. Every Saturday he brought home a pasty.
Mary, recall if you can Dave leaving home.
Yeah, I can remember the night Dave left home. The first time he ever left home, and I'd say he was 17 years old. And you know where Pettit's lived, Jim? There on the corner, going up the steps.
Pettit's
Mm-hmm.
in Park City.
Yeah.
Oh, surely you remember that, where that was.
Well, no, they didn't
Yeah.
live there in this one all the time. This is years ago.
Uh-huh.
No.
But anyway, it was called the Aunt Evans house. That's where we moved. That's where we moved into that when we came from the river, when we lived on Provo River. And we moved into that house, and somebody come to visit Dad and Mother that night, and it was in the evening, and it was snowing to beat the dickens. And I saw Dave come in and go into the back bedroom, and I saw him come out with something rolled under his arm, and I found out afterwards that it was a couple of shirts and some socks. And he left, never said a word to anybody, and was gone. And he didn't come home, of course. Now, how he ever got out of town, I never knew. Neither did Mother ever know, unless she told you sometimes. He never told any of us, because there was no way out of town, and it was the middle of winter, And he went with Bill Gray. He was Blanche Dunbar's husband's brother, an older brother. He went together. And in 4 days, you know, Mother and Dad was just fit to be tied, and they contacted the police, you know, but nobody, of course, had seen him or heard tell of him. And in 4 days, she got a letter from him, and he was over in Nevada working in the mine. And after that, he was gone from home most of the time. He never was back home to live.
Were you aware of any conflict between he and Dad, or
No,
any reason that he
no,
would have run
no.
away?
I think it was just that he, you know, he wanted to work. And
Teenage urge. Huh?
yeah, and he was really young, you know, to go in the mines, but he never come back, and he worked. He was awful good to write to Mother. Boy, it's too bad we didn't have all those letters, because Mother would get up in the morning and she'd say, "Oh, I'm going to hear from Dave today. I dreamed about him last night." She never forgot him for 5 minutes. And he'd come home a time or two, you know, to see us. And he'd tell us stories of where he'd been. And I can remember him, he taught us a song, "The Big Rock Candy Mountain." And I've forgotten it. I could sing that to you before.
Summer day in the midst of May. That one? The
Yes,
bird
that's
one.
the song.
Was Dave the one that got involved in the union organization?
Yes.
Got blackballed
Yes,
for
and
union
blackballed.
activity?
Yes. And he
He was affiliated with the International Workmen of the World, which was known as the IWW, or the Wobblies.
Yeah, they
And
called
right
him
after the Second World War, they pulled a general strike in all the mining industry. It was broken, and he was then blackballed out of Park City. He never could work again in the mines, in the regular mines in Park City. He finally got clear in Butte and in Bingham, so that he traveled back and forth between those places working. Dave was something of a boomer. Work 10 days or work to a payday and move on to another job.
He told me one time he worked until he earned $3,000. And this was in Butte. And he went over to Denver, and in 4 days he was flat broke. And then he came back to Park City and worked over at the Premier or somewhere.
Well, that was later.
That was later,
in
shaft
Park
work,
City,
you know. But
contract.
contract work. He'd tell us stories about it. He told us about going to jail in Butte because some guys that he was mixed up with had made home brew or home whiskey. It was during Prohibition. And he was the one that got caught with some, and he spent some jail time then for bootlegging. So that's Dave's life. But he was
I can elaborate on Mother's insight about him coming a little bit. We were living in the little house by Oakwood School, and Mother would say, "Well, Dave's coming, or we'll hear from Dave," or some such a thing indicating that he would be there. And on one occasion, she mentioned this one morning, and as she always would, she'd make but she had to work with elaborate steps for a good meal, or she knew he'd be hungry. And he finally walked into the yard, and he had caught a freight train that had deposited him out in the freight yards out where Cudahy packing plant is now. And he had walked all that way through Salt Lake City and out to 60th South on Highland Drive. Well, it was in the spring, but he was exhausted and hadn't eaten for 2 or 3 days riding the train, so the food was more than welcome. And for a little while then, he stayed at home. Tom and Russ, not Russ, Tom and Dad had gotten a job assisting to lay the original concrete strip out Highland Drive here. It went from 33rd South here to 64th South in Cottonwood. It was one narrow strip of ribbon of concrete, and Dad and Tom were running the moke board, as it was called, a big 2x12 plank with some handles fastened on each end, and this is the way they screed off the concrete by hand to move it into position, to level it off. And Dad was just not capable of doing it. He just couldn't. His breath wouldn't last long enough for him to do it. So David stayed that time and worked one end of that moke board for his dad so that he could continue to get a payday or two. I think he was there for 2 or 3 weeks at that time, Mary.
Well, see, I wasn't home. See,
now, that's the first time I really had an opportunity to get acquainted with Dave.
I think I told you the other day how Joe met him, didn't I, on the tape?
It's on the tape.
That he was up in town with the basketball team, and Dave was walking along and asked him where the, I think it was the Semlo Hotel, he asked him. And Joe just knew him, that he was a Gwilliam, and asked him, he was in his uniform, you know, he was still in his army uniform. And that's how Joe met him, just by sight.
With all of his travel by train and hoboing, if you want to call it that, although I don't think he ever did the hobo part except to get transportation from where. But you never saw him that he wasn't immaculately clean.
Never.
He shaved every day. He somehow kept a suit of clothes that he could put on and a clean shirt. Never any time did you see him disheveled or dirty or run down. Just as neat as a pin, always. In which he imitated his dad. Our dad was the same way.
He was the same way.
I know what little time I've been around him, from time to time he would describe having to jungle out, as the term is called, the people who were riding the railroads, to go down by the river bank under the trees and cook up a pot of stew in a tin can, whatever they could put together. But he would describe dipping water out of a cold stream and shave every morning, whether he had any reason to or not. This was his story to me.
He was always immaculate.
Yeah.
Even when he come home petrified drunk. Now, he'd be drunk, he'd almost have to climb the steps up to my place. And boy, there wasn't a hair out of place. He'd come home and get cleaned up, put on his dark blue suit. Always had a dark blue suit.
Blue serge.
Blue serge suit. And then he'd go downtown and drink all night, spend his money. But he was always glad when he'd show up. Mother, I can remember Mother'd ask him questions when he'd come home. Every once in a while he'd go off home. And she always worried that he didn't eat, you know. And she said, Dave, did you always have food? Did you always eat? And he says, oh, I ate pretty good, but I postponed a few meals.
Never missed one, he'd say, but I postponed one or two.
And I guess he did, many a one. And when Mother died, he wasn't working. He was in Butte, and he was boarding at Ag, that's the girl he married finally. He was boarding at their home, and they were awful good to him. And those girls got money together, they and their mother, and sent him home so he could come home to Mother's funeral. Otherwise, he couldn't have come. So he was, you know, he just bummed around. He was a loner. Oh boy, was he a loner. You couldn't call him anything else but a loner. But he saw an awful lot of his kids when he finally got there. Of course, he finally married Ag, and they had the 3 children. And the oldest girl is Gwen. She lives in Nevada City. And Dave called me from Nevada, they lived in Eureka then. And he called me and he said, of course they were Catholic. They were always raised Catholic. And Dave called me one day from Eureka, and he said, the head sister, the sister superior, has been out here, and she's been talking to Gwen. Gwen was just a young girl. She was, I don't think she'd started high school yet. And he said they want, the way they told the story to him, the superior, that she had prayed for a certain thing for herself. And she was sitting behind Gwen in church one morning in Mass. And she thought, if my prayers are answered, that little girl is going to St. Mary's of the Wasatch. So Dave called me and he said that then that really happened. She said her prayers were answered, and she said, he says we can send Gwen, if we can buy her clothes, they'll take care of her schooling. So he said, you suppose you and Joe can help her get her clothes, and I said sure. So she came in and we outfitted her, and she went up here to St. Mary's of Wasatch for about 3 years until she went to Nevada City. But that's how come she got to go there. And that was one of Dave's oldest daughter. And he had one son, and he was alone. He was much alone, and he took to boozing. And he died in Peru.
This one died in South America.
Yeah, and just died all alone in the gutter. But the girls both turned out fine, got good husbands, they really know that.
Now I know Frances and you guys were close in later life. Were
Yeah.
you always close with her?
Well, of course, Frances moved down here with the folks when they came in 1919, yes.
Well, we finally concluded it was the spring of 1920.
Yeah, I guess it was.
Take off to count that, but
I think that's when it was. But we, after she left, see, then I didn't come to Salt Lake.